Well, advice isn't really my favorite word. Sometimes it comes unsolicited from people that you don't necessarily respect or trust, and if you listen too much sometimes to what people are saying, it has a way of taking root in ways that are unexpected, that can be detrimental and not ultimately to your benefit. So, what I'm about to tell you isn't so much advice, but here are some thoughts personally on what I would do differently if I had it all to start over with my music career. And the first thing I think that is most important, and without this, a lot of the other things won't work, is a 10-year commitment. And the first reason for this, just think of a band like Billy Talent, who was originally Pez, but they had some legal issues with that. It took them nearly 10 years to succeed and to really break it and really make it in the music industry. And if you were really to go looking for it, there are so many examples of bands that it took them exactly that long to make it. If you've read the book Outliers, it says, it takes 10,000 hours to master anything, really, whether it's business or music or any kind of craft or skill that you want to hone and develop. It takes about 10 years to do. And you've heard of those success stories that were, so-called overnight success stories that were really 10 years in the making. And so without that 10-year commitment, I'm not sure ultimately that you can make it very far, because you will be easily sidetracked onto other projects, other ideas, other things that seem fresh and appealing. And I've run into this so many times as a creative, wanting to start a million different projects, having so many ideas. You feel like you're going to burst if you don't get them out. But I think there's maybe a reason why a creative has so many ideas. As a creative person, it's just maybe the way that God wired us. And so therein lies kind of our ultimate intrinsic battle is, are you willing to commit yourself to for the next 10 years to a single cause, a single mission, a single band? Would you be willing to do that? And honestly, I don't want to water it down, but it's really more about the willingness to do it for the next 10 years, as opposed to the actual carrying through with it. And this realization came from a lot of the business training that I've had over the course of the last year or so. And this is exactly how a lot of entrepreneurs will look at their business projects. They look to commit to it for the next 5 to 10 years. And usually that's a very, very strong indication of whether or not it's going to make it. And the turning point is usually that commitment. The moment you make that commitment, it seems like God suddenly puts things, people, events in your path that really cause an accelerated rate of performance and success. And so without that commitment, I'm not sure what else you've got. And the other thing that I would do is go to open mics or shows 2 to 3 nights a week. Basically, I should probably say performing 2 to 3 nights a week, because I think some people are going to hear that and go, oh, well, he's saying I should go to open mics all the time, and that's the problem or the issue with my career, or that's the thing that I'm not doing. No, I'm not saying that at all. I think you should be in an environment or in a place where you can perform 2 to 3 nights every single week. And if you do it 3 nights a week, basically that would be, 150 days a year, give or take. So, roughly half your year. And so when you're doing that, like, really the importance of that is obviously getting yourself out there. Obscurity is really the worst enemy of any artist. But the other reason for that is for networking. You get to know people. You become part of a community. In Calgary, we have Cafe Koi, and they host songwriting open mics on Tuesday night and jazz and instrumental nights on Thursday night. And so being part of those communities puts you in touch with other people that are out playing, right? They're also playing shows. So you may get invited to come and perform with them or at their show or open for them. And that's going to lead to more opportunities down the line. And that, honestly, part of that is being in a community and helping each other. And there aren't too many people that take that stance, that are, they feel like they're in competition with everybody else. And I feel that if you work together as a community, you are going to reach for greater heights. And part of playing 2 to 3 nights a week is the willingness to drive the miles. And this is going to come up again later in another point that I'd like to talk about. But if, here in Calgary, we've got a bunch of, little satellite towns, suburbs, if you'd like to call them that. We've got Cochrane, Airdrie, Chestermere, Okotoks, several little towns or cities like that all around, within, we'll just say within 50 to 100 miles of the city, there are a bunch of places that one could hit up. And so when you learn about open mics or opportunities that are, maybe not too far outside of your own city, but definitely a distance that you could travel, I would say do it. Definitely go out and make that happen. And I would probably eliminate more distractions in my life as well. I think I've done a reasonably good job of that. I don't really tune myself into media, and I haven't really experienced any negative effects from that, I don't feel. Sometimes it's kind of one of those things where if you knew exactly what was trending or what was going on, that you could bring it up in conversation and have a reference point with which to relate people to. But ultimately, I think that's honestly really the only downside to it, having cut out TV and newspapers and radio, essentially. I can't tell you what your distractions might be. Maybe video games, maybe TV, maybe gambling, maybe shopping, maybe your dating life is becoming a major distraction. And I'm not discouraging anybody from having a relationship. I think that's awesome. But we can all admit that there are certain time wasters in our life, and working to eliminate those is going to give us greater focus. And that's another thing that I want to bring up is you want to create focus, and sometimes to the point of irrationality. You don't want to be a part of a project where people aren't committed to long-term sustainability. In other words, if you're working with people who can't see down the line, who don't know where they're going to be in even 2 years, let alone 10 years, you don't want to be in a situation where you play with one band and it breaks up in a year and a half, and you start a new band and it breaks up in a year and a half. You're not even starting to catch the type of momentum that you could be if you were committed long term to a band. And that might seem obvious, but I've been in so many bands where that was exactly the case, that it lasted a year and a half or 2 years. And that isn't enough time for a band to hone its craft and hone its abilities and write songs. You can accomplish a lot in that time, don't get me wrong. But it's not enough time to really, test that relationship, test that commitment, that vision of the band. And so, if at all possible, be a part of something or create something that can catch momentum and you can continue to develop it, and you can continue to grow it, and it doesn't stop. And, being a solo artist, that's relatively simple. As long as you don't give up, your career doesn't give up on you either. And you can hire musicians, or you could ask friends to play on your CD, or come play with you at shows to have a little bit of accompaniment or backup. And that'll work great. If you are in a band situation, then again, try to come up with a way of continuing the process without that band. Unless you've deciphered that everybody in your band is absolutely committed for the next 10 years. Create a project that you could go out and play on your own if you have to. And I think a greater part of this too is submitting yourself to mentorship. And you should really find people who have accomplished something in the industry that you would like to accomplish, if at all possible. And when you submit yourself to what they say, and I'm not saying, and that's not always the easiest thing to do, but if you heed their counsel and really go and apply what they tell you to do, I think you will bypass a lot of the mistakes and a lot of the nonsense that can go on in the process. And there are a lot of things that, you might be in the beginning phase or stages of creating your music career, and you wouldn't necessarily know what the pitfalls or the shortfalls are until you get started. But someone who's been there is going to be able to tell you what those things are, right? Another thing that I would do differently is I would go to more conventions. And again, this is where I would spare no expense. And I mean it, 100%. I would spare no expense going to conventions. I would talk to people, I would do some research, and I would find between 4 and 10 a year that I can't miss, that I absolutely have to be at. These are essential. And again, networking is a huge part of that. You can meet lots of people that can move your career ahead in ways that you couldn't have even imagined. And being there with a demo in hand, and I don't care if it's last year's demo or if it's the worst performance you've ever done, carry something with you, go to the conventions, spare no expense, drive as far as you need to get to them. I would go North America wide if that's where you live. Again, I'd find 4 to 10 conventions a year that I could go to, and I would always show up, and I would spare no expense in doing it. I don't care how much gas costs. I don't care how much the convention costs. I don't care how much food costs or my flight costs. I would be there, period. And, all this comes down to being consistent and persistent in your efforts, right? Without that consistency and persistency, and I've already touched on this, but I'm repeating it again just for emphasis. Without those things, a lot of this doesn't work. Another thing that I would probably do is play more shows, and not necessarily free shows. So don't go out there and get this idea that, okay, I should play more shows and then just take whatever. I think it's still good to hold yourself to some kind of standard as a musician, and my friend Jonathan Ferguson is very good at this. If they ask you to play one set, then you have a certain price. If it goes longer than that, or 2 sets or 3 sets, then you have another price. And just making sure that people do treat you as a professional and don't try to shortchange you. And in this musical climate or industry, or even venues, it may be difficult sometimes to find venues or places that will treat you and still get out 2 to 3 nights a week. But therein lies the challenge, and that's something that you need to figure out. And which brings me to another point, is treating it like a business. And this is something that I really don't feel like I had figured out early on. But if you were to treat your music career like a business, then basically you would be willing to do things five days a week, right? Monday through Friday, you are open for business. And if you're a musician and most of your shows happen on the weekend, you're a weekend warrior, great. But you are still open for business during the week too. And the importance of that is just, again, when you're willing to make that type of long-term commitment, that all of a sudden people, events, circumstances come in your life that propel and move you forward. Another thing I'd like to say about creating focus, I'm making a bit of an assumption here that you have some type of relatively secure 9-to-5 sort of work that's going to keep you afloat financially. And hopefully it's not too energy sucking or soul sucking. But you're going to build your music career on top of that. And so whatever income you make on top of your job is basically a bonus. And it's better to look at it that way, I feel, than to dive in without any kind of financial backing. It's the idea of delayed gratification. In other words, the time should come, if you follow these ideas, where you're making enough money from your musical efforts that you won't have to work anymore. But you have to start somewhere. If you're in the beginning stages, chances are you're not getting paid enough with music alone to actually make a career out of it, and for it to be your full-time living. So it's your part-time living to begin with, and be willing to go to irrational extents to make these things happen. But don't just quit your job because tomorrow you think that your music career is going to blow up. So just to go over those points quickly again, the first thing is to make a 10-year commitment. Play open mics or shows 2 to 3 nights a week. Just try to be out somewhere where you can be networking and connecting in the industry. Eliminate distractions from your life. Treat your music career like a business. Create more focus with your time in your life. Play more shows. Be willing to drive the miles. Submit yourself to some type of mentorship if you can find it. Be consistent and persistent. And go to more conventions and spare no expense in doing it. Here's a list of things that I would consider doing. And this list is a lot shorter. The first is going to school. And the reason for that is just to create a little bit of foundation. And I didn't go to school for music, so I've pretty much have had to come up with my own methodology, philosophy, and really just examine things and figure out things on my own. And I feel like, a lot of the personal development work and a lot of the business training that I've taken and that I've elected to do has really helped me give insight and to create some kind of foundation in what I'm doing and to understand that what I need to do to pay the price. And a lot of people, there's some attitudes of entitlement. I'm not here to judge, but I feel like one of the things that may be missing in people's lives when they're looking to create success, especially in music, but maybe in other areas, is exactly that. So having some type of foundation, when you go to school, obviously you're going to create a little bit of a network. You're going to get to know some people who are either teaching it or are in the industry or who have some other contacts. Maybe they're aware of some studios or some venues that you don't know about. And so I feel like going to school might have given me that foundation, and even just to be absorbed in music for 2 to 4 years quite frankly, it was probably an incredible experience as well. So that's one thing that I would consider doing. And I think as long as you're humble and you're willing to submit to some authority, that you will always learn. But if you go in with the attitude that you're not going to learn anything, you're not going to learn anything. I think I would probably be consistent with updating my blog and site more. And the importance of this is, like I mentioned before, treating it like a business. And, when you've got, the other 10 to 15 hours of your week, in other words, the time that your downtime that's not taken up by your job or sleep, because sleep is important too, is time that you'd want to be furthering your career. And spending 30 minutes to an hour writing a blog post might seem like the furthest thing from your mind or the last thing you want to do. And yet sometimes that's exactly what you want to be doing, just to connect with your fans, your friends, your family, whoever it is that is coming to your site. And you never know who is coming to your site, right? So I think that's something that I would do more. And finally, a list of things that I would have done anyway. And so these are things that I've found to be ultimately very, very valuable in my life. And I probably, if I had it to do all over again, I would still go through the process of these things. The first is personal development. I don't regret a minute I've spent in personal development. I feel like I've conquered and overcome a lot of difficulty, a lot of emotional things in my life. I've had some really low points, and a lot of that seems to melt away when you are excited and enthusiastic about the possibilities in life. And so reading books and listening to audios and plugging into blogs, and maybe to a lesser extent than some of the other activities I've mentioned, but I still feel like those things should be a part of your life. And whenever you find a leader, generally they're very fierce readers as well. They do a lot of reading, and John Maxwell says, leader, everything rises and falls on leadership. So you want to be a leader because everything hinges on it. And so I still feel like you're doing music or you're doing something else, you should be a reader of books, and you should be a student of growing yourself and investing in programs. And I can't tell you what's going to work for you, but there are definitely some programs and some books that have had a huge impact on me, and I'd be willing to tell you more about those if you want to email me about that. I think I would still do podcasting regardless. I don't regret a moment of doing that either. I think it's been a wonderful experience and growing as a communicator. And also it's something to be like consistent with, but obviously the podcasting thing has worked really well for a band like They Might Be Giants, because they used to have that dial-a-song thing where you could call, I think they still do maybe, where you could call in and hear a new song just about every time you called in. And so podcasting really works for a band like that produces a lot of new material. But whatever it is format, you decide to take. My podcast is more of a focus on helping musicians and helping them build their careers and so forth. Whatever angle you feel would be suited to you, I think podcasting is a tool that could be used to your advantage. And again, like I say, in 5 p.m. to 12 a.m., what are you going to do between those hours? And you might feel like podcasting is maybe the last thing you would want to do. And yet, when you're treating it like a business, you would probably get very consistent with it, whether it was weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, or semi-annually. However you conceive of it, it's something that you would put priority on and do anyway, and not something that you'd quit or let go just because it doesn't entertain you. And finally, one of the things that I would have done anyway is learning my way around the studio, and I don't regret doing that for a moment either. It's been a very valuable skill to become a better audio engineer and be able to mix things on my own. It has meant that my band can get demos out more quickly and efficiently, and it has also meant that I can take a lot of those limitations that used to be there in creating my own projects. I'm now able to do a lot of those things that I wasn't even sure how to do or how they were possible. I'm now able to create fairly full tracks and do it all on my own too, which isn't to say putting all the emphasis on being a self-produced. I still think it's best to work in community with people, and that way you're gonna get the best final product, I feel. But I still wanted to know how I could personally make, if I were to self-produce a CD or a project or an EP, that I knew that I wanted to be able to do it somehow, and I figured out a way of doing that. So I don't regret learning my way around the studio. Now, is it absolutely essential to the process? No. But obviously, if you can't or don't record on your own, you're going to want the resources to do it, because it costs money, and you're going to want to be serious about recording. So, in conclusion, making that 10-year commitment to your music is perhaps the most essential part of this whole thing. And if I had it all to do differently, which isn't to say that I can't start tomorrow, because I absolutely can. Right now, my focus in life is a little bit different, and I believe that there can and will be a time that I come back to music with some fierce focus. Is to make that 10-year commitment. Just say, I'm going to do it. I don't care what it costs. I don't care what it takes. I'm going to stay consistent. And it doesn't matter how many miles I have to drive. It doesn't matter how tired I get. Nobody cares about the details. You can be unbalanced in your life for a season and create the type of success that you want. And if at the end of what I've said, if you follow all those ideas, at the end of it, you don't have at least 1,000 fans, you must be doing something wrong. If you, at the end of it, you don't have a career, if you don't have more than you have right now, you're definitely doing something wrong.